Jonna, calm down. Welcome back to my channel, government friends. This is Mr. Carly. Remember to click subscribe down below. Keep the likes higher than the dislikes. We don't need any bot terrorism out there. And hit the little button. No, what is it called? The little bell there. They'll give you notifications. You can personalize it or you can get it so that it gives you all the notifications. And I'm just making fun of Generation Z YouTubers right now. You do not need to subscribe to me. So the second topic in the executive branch was the federal bureaucracy, the budget making process. I said as long as you know three cabinet positions, you're probably in good shape. And I put the three big ones down below: the Department of State, which conducts foreign policy and diplomacy with other countries; the Department of Defense, which includes the branches of the military; and then the Department of the Treasury, which basically is the nation's banker and runs the money. Also, I wrote down what the actual executive office of the president is. The only big difference between the executive office and the cabinet is that the cabinet is in charge of enforcing laws in their departments, whereas uh, the executive office of the president just advises the president on various issues. Federal bureaucracy just means that there's more to the executive branch, just the president. It's like hundreds of employees of a variety of different departments or organizations. Summarize the steps of the budget making process. So over time, the federal bureaucracy has grown and grown and grown as the federal government and the executive branch has taken on more roles and provided more services to people. It's an example of federalism. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. But they need to budget and they need to fund these different programs. So the first thing that happens in the budget making process is the president will suggest or come out with his or her priorities of the budget for that year. And then Congress has the power of spending, so they actually have to decide what the money's going to be. So if you think back to that activity we did in class, the first thing we did is the House of Representative people met together. So the two people that were in the House and the two people in the Senate met together, and each of you separately came up with how you wanted to fund all those departments. And then, so that's the first step: is each House of Congress does their what's called appropriations or budgeting separately. Then they come together in what's called a budget resolution committee, and they all have to agree on the same budget bill. It has to pass both houses of Congress in exact same way for it to get then sent to the president. So it starts with the president and ends with the president, because the last step is the bill goes from Congress to the president. He either decides that he likes the funding that Congress has given him enough, it's close enough to his or her own priorities, or it's not. He either signs it into law or vetoes it. Now, if he vetoes it and Congress doesn't pass another one and there isn't a budget that gets passed by the time the old one runs out, then you get what's called a government shutdown. And I'm sure you all don't remember that because you were too young to remember the one that happened last year. So, anyway, moving on. That was the big things about that. Related to the bureaucracy and what it does. But hopefully, you got a good idea of what some of those departments were and what they did from that budgeting activity, like Department of Interior, Department of Veterans Affairs, Health and Human Services, Housing and Urban Development, all those different programs. But you don't need to memorize all of them. Just know that there are a lot of moving parts to the executive branch. Last thing we did was talked about the Electoral College. So how presidents are elected. So once again, when you vote for president, you're not actually directly voting for the candidate, you're voting for the elector that promises to vote for that candidate. And whoever wins the popular vote or the most votes overall of the people in that state will then win, usually in most states, all the electoral college votes. So in the electoral college, one thing to specify is that you need a majority of the electoral college votes, which is 270. If you don't get 270, then it actually goes to the House of Representatives and they get to pick. The popular vote is just the total votes of all Americans. So you could have, because of the way that the Electoral College works, you could have a person that wins the most votes overall in the popular vote, but loses the Electoral College based on the way the state electoral votes are allotted. Then you also have these battleground states, and these are states with a lot of electoral college votes that could go either way in an election. And one argument against the electoral college is that it puts a lot of focus on these battleground states and people just ignore some of the states that aren't as important. Now, on the flip side, an argument for the electoral college is it actually can help small states by giving them a little more influence, because now they get a set amount of votes, and it limits the amount of votes that a larger state can have, so that the smaller state kind of can have a little more say. So for example, California is the most populous state in the nation, but the most votes they can ever put forth in a presidential election is 55, regardless of how many people vote for one of the candidates. On the flip side, you've got Wisconsin, which has a much smaller population than California, but they have 10. So that gives them a little bit of a leg up, because if you were to compare them based on population, you've got like 50 million Californians versus like 5 million Wisconsinites. So that the Californians, if you did popular vote, hugely outweigh the votes of the Wisconsinites. But because of the Electoral College, it's not as much necessarily. So that's one argument for. We will do some more arguments for and against next time. You can find many a video that talks about it. But the big things are, you can have this weird thing where a person wins the popular vote but doesn't win the presidency, puts a lot of focus on battleground states. If there's a tie, that can lead to a lot of issues with politicization. My apologies, sorry, in the House of Representatives, but it does give smaller states a little more representation. It also, we're going to read this article, and we did a little bit in 1B talking about how rural and urban areas are really divided. So the rural areas are usually areas that are more sparsely populated, but the Electoral College gives them a little more influence in the election so that their needs aren't completely overlooked. So we'll talk a little more about that next time. But that's it, Johnny. You got anything else you want to say? Yes, but my wife's palate is sorry. Question was, do I have a good opinion on cheese since I'm from Wisconsin? And the answer is yes. But my wife has a much more sensitive palate for those kinds of things. Actually, my mother and father-in-law just sent us a package of cheese from Wisconsin, and the cheese curds squeak. That's how you know they're good, my friends, is if they squeak when you bite into them. All right, that's all we got now. Be on the lookout for the Jared, Jonna, Mr. Carly podcast that may be coming next semester. Peace out.